Today, I'm going to show you guys the most important things that you need to know if you use loops in your beats. If you use loops in your beats, there are a bunch of things that you should keep in mind to make sure you make the best use of your loops. There are some really helpful functions within FL Studio, and there's also some general beat making techniques that you can use whenever you use loops. And before we get into it, if you guys are enjoying my videos, think about subscribing, and if you get tired of seeing my videos, it's just one click away to unsubscribe, but it really does help my videos out. First off, this is something that I'm sure a lot of you guys already know when it comes to using loops in your playlist. You can easily stretch your loop out by enabling this function up here. And you can drag the loop out to expand or shrink it. And you guys can see we're jumping by the grid line here. So if you hold down Alt, you can do it a little bit more smoothly because it turns off snapping to grid. And when you do so, the loop speed as well as its pitch is going to change depending on whether you shrink it or you expand it. And when you shrink or you expand your loop to get it back to its original pitch, what you're going to do is double click on the loop here. And from here, you're going to want to select the correct mode in order to make sure the loop has the best audio quality. Now, when I made my video a little while back on one-shots, the stretch mode that I recommended in that situation was using stretch right here. The reason was, if you use your one-shots in the piano roll and you use it as if it's an instrument, it's going to be really important to make sure the sample's length is going to be the exact same no matter what pitch you play it at. But for loops, our objective is a little bit different here. We're not going to be playing this loop as if it's an instrument. It's going to be playing at a consistent pitch throughout the entire beat. Therefore, our goals are going to be a little bit different when we're selecting our stretch mode here. Looking at the different options here, these are essentially different algorithms that allow you to stretch your loop out in different ways. And you guys can see if I start to select different options here, our waveform is literally changing. Now personally, I took a lot of time to do a lot of different types of testing with different types of loops that have different instruments and sounds within them. And from what I tested, your best option is going to be this option right here, E3 generic. I would say about 90% of the time this is going to produce the best audio quality for your loop. The only other mode that I ended up using was this one here, E3 mono. This produced better audio quality whenever I had a loop that was in mono. So for example, if I had a bass line where it was perfectly in the middle of my stereo mix, or if I had a vocal that was also in mono, this actually produced a little bit better results. But the rest of these modes in here, you're probably not going to end up using. To quickly run through them, the E2 section over here, the legacy ones, these are the algorithms that were in the older versions of FL Studio, and as you can imagine, they've probably improved since then, so there's no real need to use these. The special area right down here, these are made for more percussive loops, but generally speaking, if you choose E3 generic, you're going to be making the right choice most of the time. The next tip is really powerful and can really help you get more use out of your loops. You'll be able to take your plain normal loops like this one here, and you can shift around the timing like so. So I'll show you guys a couple of ways that you can go about doing this. One of those ways is to use new time, which is probably going to be the better option if you have a loop that has a lot of notes playing in it and it's a little bit more elaborate. So to get into new time, what you're going to do is go into the settings up here and just select time warp sample. New time will basically allow you to make adjustments within your loop to affect when certain notes will play. And this can be helpful in a lot of different ways, in both utility use as well as creative use, like I just showed you guys a second ago. If, for example, you have a loop where the instruments within that loop aren't perfectly on time, for example, let's say I have this drum break here and I want this note to be perfectly on grid, so I want to bump it left slightly here. I can easily just use new time by going into time warp sample again, and I go into edit and I select quantize time. You guys can see everything's going to snap onto grid and have perfect timing. After this, I would just select send to playlist, and now I have my perfectly quantized drum loop right down here. And you guys can see the timing difference in between the two. But we can use this more creatively as well. We don't just have to use this to get things perfectly on grid. For example, let's say I go back into my main loop here. As you guys can see, new time will automatically place a bunch of markers down for you. I'm going to give you a quick tutorial on how to use it here. I'm going to delete all these markers by holding down Control and using my mouse button to select everything, and then just hitting delete. And using this section right up here, I can scrub through my loop to hear when a new note is being played. So it sounds like around here is when a new note gets played. And at this point, if I hold down Shift, this will bring up a marker preview. So once I get it into the exact place that I want it, just left click the mouse And there you go, it's gonna set down a marker. And now I can do that again. And let's say I make a mistake, I put down a marker in the wrong area, I can just double click it and that'll delete that marker as well. And here is when the power of NewTime can really help you push your loop in creative ways. I'm gonna start moving these markers around and change where these notes are actually being played. You guys can see I can fundamentally shift around the rhythm of my loop and come up with my own arrangement using NewTime. So instead of being stuck with whatever the loop creator made here, I can start to take more control for myself. And again, once I am happy with whatever I've come up with, I can just send this to the playlist. The timing of all the notes are different now. The second way I can do this without using NewTime is to stretch directly on my playlist. Although this method is probably better suited for more simple loops, this is just a heads up. All you'll need to do is create slices in between the notes that you want to start to time warp. And you can do this by manually going into the slice feature up here. Holding down Shift as well as the mouse button brings up the preview once again, and holding down Alt will let you go in between the grid lines. Or instead you can just hover the mouse over the part of the loop that you want to slice and just hit Insert on your keyboard. Another method is to go into the sample settings up here and go into the chop area. This is going to give you a bunch of options down here for pre-programmed chopping. This can be very helpful if you have a quantized rhythmic loop, so those are a few options that you can go with. The next step, once you have every single slice made, what you're going to want to do is go into each and every chop sample settings and make them all unique one by one. By the way, if you want to use this method, two things that you need to pay attention to: make sure the stretch mode is enabled up here. As well, make sure you choose E3 generic for your loop before you start slicing it. And at this point, you can just hold down Shift and go in between the slices so this cursor pops up. And once you drag your mouse around, you guys can see it will start to warp the different slices, and just let go, and there you go. And like I mentioned, this is probably going to be better for a very basic loop. You guys can see how tedious this would be if I had a loop that had a ton of different notes in it. I would have to go to each and every single note and make them all unique, which can be very time consuming. So in a scenario like that, NewTime would probably be a better option to go with. But one advantage of doing this straight from the playlist is that I can go ahead and start to rearrange my different chops before I start experimenting with time warping. So that's a plus on that side. But at this point, if you're going down this road, it just might be a better idea to use a sampler like I showed you guys in the video I made a little while back on the most important things that you need to know if you want to sample. Another helpful tool, once you get to the point where you like what you've made with your loop after all the stretching and manipulating, is to consolidate your track. You can easily do this by right-clicking on the track itself and just clicking on Consolidate this track. This will turn the loop into a standalone loop, which can be helpful if you get to the point where you're arranging your beat out and you don't want to start fumbling with multiple chops. You can also edit this loop as a whole in Edison once you consolidate it. Edison can be really helpful in a lot of different ways. For example, you guys can hear in this loop. You guys can hear that small little clicking noise right in this section. So in Edison, I have all these tools at my disposal to help clean up my loop if I run into issues like this. Next up, a couple of small tips to gain more information about your loop. If you have a loop, but it doesn't have any information attached to the file name as to what the actual BPM of the loop is, you can just auto-detect the BPM of the loop by again going into the sample settings up here and selecting Detect Tempo. And you guys can see it gives you an estimation right down here, but if it seems like it's way off, you can just select a range and it'll give you a BPM within that range. Another tip to get more information about your loop, I've already shown you guys this a million times, so apologies if I'm repeating myself. Wave Candy can show you all the notes within your loop. So if you want a full tutorial on how to use this thing, the link's right above my head. I made a full video on this. Finally, to get more out of your loops, you're not just stuck with the sounds that come with the loop. I can always use resynthesis to do this. This is something that I showed you guys a little while back in a video about using loops and keeping your beat interesting. Making a full beat using a loop can be really challenging, especially when trying to keep things interesting in the beat. And in that video, I showed you guys a bunch of tips and techniques that you can use whenever you're using loops and still end up making a beat that's interesting and not repetitive. So check that video out if you're interested in learning how to do a technique like this and many more. That video should be appearing on the screen right now. And if you guys have enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. My free drum kit is available in the description box below, as well as a link to the Discord if you want your beats reviewed live. I do that every 2 weeks, and I will see you guys next time.